In this objective, we're going to be talking about circle graphs, often known as pie charts. So these circle graphs, which you probably have heard called the pie chart, these are used to separate data into percentages, right? Kind of into categories with percentages. So as we saw before, a percent is simply a part over a total. So part of the data that we're looking at over the total data that we're looking at. And often when we're talking about converting between percentage and the amount of data we have, we use a proportion where the percent out of 100 is equal to the part out of the total amount of data. So similar to a bar graph, when I look at a circle graph or a pie chart, I often will note if I'm given percentages or if I'm given the amounts of data. So in this case, this chart gives me percentages for each category, but it does tell me in the problem that this data represents 350 total items. And we want to figure out how many of each item of each color there are. So in order to do this, we're going to set up our proportion that relates the percentage of an item to how many of that item there are. So we'll start with blue. Blue here is 22 out of the total 100% of our colors. And we don't know how many blue there were, but we do know that there were 350 total items. So just as a reminder, when we are solving a proportion, we're going to be using cross multiplication. So we can cross multiply 22 times 350 to get 7,700 equals our other cross multiplication, 100x. And then we're going to divide both sides by that 100, and we'll find that our x equals 77, or there are 77 blue whatever items or whatever we're looking at here. So we're going to take a look at green next, and it's a very similar process. So we have 38 out of 100 total percent equals an unknown amount of green items, but out of a total of 350 items. And we're going to use this in a similar way to go ahead and solve for the number of green items. So cross multiplying, 100x equals our next cross multiplication, 13,300. We can divide both sides by that 100. And then we get that there are 133 green items. Okay, so there's a little bit of a shortcut to doing this. Setting up the proportion is sort of the foolproof way to do this if you happen to forget the trick. But one of the tricks here is to look at our percent, right? So we're going to do this for red. Red is 40%. And convert this back into a decimal. So take that decimal point and move it 2 spaces to the left or divide by 100. All right, and our percentage here is 0.40. So in order to find 40% of our total items, we can take that decimal and multiply it by the total number of items, 350. And when we do that, we're going to get 140. And that tells us we have 140 red items. And we can go ahead and let's test this out on one of the ones that we already solved a proportion for. So for green, if I convert 38% to a decimal, that's 0.38. So let's try this out. Let's take 0.38 times 350. So you should maybe pause the video and try this out, see what you get. But when I type that in my calculator, I still get 133. So it's just a bit of a shortcut that we can use. So let's see how we do this if we're working in kind of reverse order. So we want to find the percent of each color. So in order to do this, it's important to find the total before we get started. So we want to add all of them up. So our green plus our pink plus our blue plus our yellow, find out how many total items of color that we have here. And so when we do this, we get that we have 145 total colors, our total items of color. So percent is our part out of our total. So we simply want to calculate that for each individual color and then convert into a percentage. So we'll start by finding the percentage of green. Then we'll find yellow, blue, and then pink. So green, we have 28 green out of the 145. So when we go ahead and find this as a decimal, that's 0.193. I want this to the nearest tenth, so I know I'm going to need 3 decimal places before I convert into a percentage. So when I convert that into a percentage, I'm just going to move my decimal place to the right or multiply by 100. So move my decimal place to the right 2 spaces or multiply by 100 to get that this is 19.3%. For yellow, we have 24 yellow items out of a total of 145. So that's 0.166 or 16.6%. So take a moment, pause the video, try blue and pink by yourself. So for blue, we got that's 22.1% and 42.1% for pink. Okay, so we can use this in a couple of different ways. So this problem's a little bit different. It tells us the number of pink items in the data is 216. I'm going to go to pink. I'm going to say, okay, there's 216 pink items in this data set. Find the total number of items, the number of orange, and the number of purple. So we can set this up using a proportion, except this time we know a little bit of different information. So we know that pink is 32% out of 100. But when we get to the other side, this time the total is what we don't know. And we do know how many pink items there were. So it's a little bit different. So when you're setting up your proportion, just make sure you're putting your information in the right spot on the proportion. All right, so we're going to go use the same method. We're going to cross multiply. So we get 32x equals 2,100, or 21,000, excuse me, 600. We'll divide by 32. And we'll find that our total number of items, or as we called it x, is 675. Now this is what we're going to use to find the rest of the information. So I'll do one with the shorthand that we discovered earlier and one with a proportion. So orange I'll do as shorthand. 44% is really just 0.44. So we can always take that and multiply it by our total number of items, which we just found, 675. And we'll get that there are a total of 297 orange items. So we found 2 pieces so far. All right, but for purple, I'm going to go ahead and use the proportion. So if we ever forget the trick with the percentage, we can always set up a proportion. Purple is 24 out of 100%, which means we don't know how many purple items there are, but we do know that there is 675 total items in this data set. So we can go ahead and cross multiply. We'll take 675 times 100, or excuse me, times 24, and we'll take 100 times, I called my number of purple items P, so we could differentiate it between that and our total. So we get 100P equals 16,200. I'm going to divide both sides by 100, find that our number of purple items is 162. So we have 162 purple.